Hi, and welcome to Chief for Yourself. It's great to have you with us wherever you are in the world today. You know, for thousands of years, the great masters and sages have known the importance of sacred sounds. They're a major part of just about every Eastern spiritual practice. But in the West, they're not too well understood, so they get much less attention than they might otherwise get. Our guest today is Alanna Kaivalya. She's the founder of the Kaivalya Yoga Method and an internationally known teacher, author, and mythologist. In 2008, Yoga Journal recognized Alanna as one of the top 21 teachers under 40. Alanna Kaivalya is the author of Sacred Sound, Discovering the Myth and Meaning of Mantra and Kirtan. And Alanna, looking at your work in Huffington Post, you're described as a modern mythologist reinterpreting Joseph Campbell's work for the 21st century. Do you kind of feel the presence of Joseph Campbell when you're unpacking these myths for us to understand?
Always, actually, yes. He's a huge hero of mine, and I try to honor him in almost everything I do.
Well, the book looks at the myth, as it says, the myth and meaning of mantra and kirtan. Why don't we start off by defining those two words, mantra and kirtan?
Sure. Well, mantra is a Sanskrit word, and it describes basically a process of bridging the mind or getting past the mind. And when I say mind, I mean like the mental chatter,
Mm-hmm.
your day-to-day obsessions, your day-to-day thoughts, things that percolate around and around and around, that don't let us actually get peace or feel what is truly alive within us. So a mantra is a way to traverse the man or the mind and get past that chatter so you can start to feel what's happening on a more subtle level. And practically, mantras are short Sanskrit phrases that help to keep the mind's attention. Because if the mind is paying attention to something else, it's not worried about the bills, it's not worried about when the kids are coming home, it's not concerned about anything except what it's focused on. And of course, there's this wonderful old adage that says, whatever you focus on is what you become.
Mm-hmm.
So as we chant these mantras, whether in our minds or out loud, we start to take on the quality of whatever the mantra is talking about, or whatever the mantra possesses.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a way to turn our whole mind around and to change things up for us so that we can start to feel a little bit better about our life and our place in the world. Kirtan is a very similar practice, and it was developed a little more recently in about the 9th century as a practice of bhakti yoga, or the yoga of devotion. And it's more of a musical practice where short phrases that are dedicated usually specifically to a deity are repeated over and over in a musical fashion, but basically for the same purpose, to entertain the mind in such a way that it's focused on something greater than the small self.
Well, when we think
So
of
there you go.
when we think of yoga, we think of all the bendy, twisty movements and positions. We're not really talking about that here, though, are we?
We're not really talking about that, no. And to be perfectly honest, those bendy and twisty positions in yoga, known as asanas, are actually a very, very modern expression of yoga. The asanas are pretty new on the scene, and mantra and kirtan have a lot more time-tested, I guess you could say, practice and efficacy than asana does.
Mm-hmm. Well, where and maybe why, I should say, does mythology fit into the discipline?
Well, mythology is a way for us as human beings to bridge the unconscious and the conscious. So mythology helps to speak to the deeper parts of ourselves that we may not actually know about. But, for example, every night you dream, and your dreams come from your unconscious. And, of course, we dream in stories. So mythology is a way for us to connect with the deep parts of ourselves. And most all of these mantras come from a specific place, and they're often described in terms of a myth, because story is how we understand things about our world, particularly things that we can't really understand, that we can't quantify or grasp or put our fingers on. And when we're trying to describe the undescribable, which is what we often do in yoga, we have to do it through story. The great religious studies professor, Maruccia Iliada, would say that yoga has the genius to cloak the infinite in human form. So these myths actually help us to better understand the great um, overarching feeling of the word I would use is numinosity, this undescribable feeling, which can't be put into words, but we feel it and we experience it as human beings. And so mythology helps us to bridge that.
Now, there are 21 mantras and kirtans in the book, including Sanskrit translation. Was it important to include the connection to Sanskrit here?
Absolutely. The language of yoga is Sanskrit. Everything that we have from the yoga tradition is written in Sanskrit. And just as, you would want to learn the language of someone you were dating, if English was their second language, in order to improve communication, as we get to know yoga better, and essentially are dating yoga, it's important for us to learn a little bit about Sanskrit so that nothing gets lost in translation. This is a language that tradition comes. This is a language that it was originally disseminated in. So for us to go back and understand the Sanskrit gives us a greater understanding of yoga. And furthermore, Sanskrit is actually the vibrational language, meaning it gives us access to the vibrational essence of whatever it's talking about, which is different than English, which is a descriptive language, where we agree to call something, and that's essentially describing it, as opposed to really invoking the essence of whatever it is we're naming.
Mm-hmm. When you were doing the translations, did you find that any of what was said in Sanskrit was either lost or tough to turn into Western wording?
Not really. I mean, it's often, I think translating Sanskrit is an art in and of itself, just because you're kind of going from apples to oranges. So oftentimes there's a little bit of, oftentimes there's liberties taken in the translation, because there's sometimes things that we have to describe a little bit further, or we're talking about deities or figures that aren't inherently Western. So if we talk about Ganesh, for example, we have to give a little bit of context to who Ganesh is, even if that's not specifically in the translation, just so people have an idea of what his powers are and what we're trying to evoke when we're using these chants and mantras.
Mm-hmm. So context is important too, just as much as wording,
Absolutely.
It's interesting you do so much with sound. You were born with a hearing impairment. Did that ever sort of stand in your way in working with sound?
Luckily, no. I was born with a hearing impairment, and I was really lucky to have parents who basically just treated me as if I could do anything. And there wasn't any excuses given for why I might not be able to do something. And in fact, my doctor had told my mother that, she should probably just get me into soccer, because I would never be musical. I would never be able to sing.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was an accomplished accordionist, and she looked at the doctor and said, "Not my daughter." So as soon as I could sit upright, she strapped an accordion to my chest and started teaching me how to play. And she always taught me to sing, and I participated in choir every single year as I grew up. And so I just was under the impression that there wasn't anything different about me. And it really wasn't until about my teenage years that I realized that people did hear differently than I did. My experience of hearing had always been fueled by the actual feeling of the sound and the vibrations. And it was astonishing to me that it wasn't the same for everybody else. So I sort of had to work backwards and figure out how everybody else heard, and how to translate my experience so that other people could also have the same experience of the vibration of the sound.
Well, you sing kirtan too. That started where, in your teenage years?
I do. No, I was, I think like any American musician, I wanted to be a rock star.
Oh, okay.
And, in college when I started yoga, I was introduced to the kirtan tradition as a part of my yoga practice. And I thought, wow, I can blend my musicianship and yoga. That was really exciting to me. So that's when I started leading kirtan. And at the time, I was very lucky to live in Boulder. And this was in the early 2000s. And it just so happened that Boulder had a really burgeoning kirtan community. And some of those folks, including Scott Medina, took me under their wing and taught me how to play kirtan. And then I became good friends with Dave Stringer, who's a wonderful kirtan artist, and he and I have actually toured all over the world and played together. Yeah.
It's interesting. So you are a musician as well as an interpreter. Is there anyone you prefer? Music is pretty heady stuff performing in front of an audience, isn't it?
Yeah, sure, but I love it. I mean, that's the thing I think that I do for the most fun. I just
Yeah,
enjoy doing that.
yeah.
Academically speaking, my work is as a mythologist. I am attending Pacifica Graduate Institute at the moment, pursuing my PhD in mythology. So I'm eyeballs deep in myths right now.
Mm. Well, you say in the book there is no wrong way to chant a mantra, but that you can use a common or traditional style. Talk about those styles of chanting.
Well, I mean, there really isn't a wrong way, pardon me, to chant a mantra.
Mm.
People get a little bit intimidated when they see the Sanskrit words and they're maybe not familiar with them, which, again, this is one of the reasons why I wrote the book. I wanted to empower people with the knowledge and the practical skills in order to be able to do this. So even if pronunciation is incorrect at the beginning, I mean, this is like learning to swing a baseball. You don't hit it out of the park on the first shot. You have to practice.
Yeah.
So it's fine to kind of bumble through the pronunciation in the beginning, just as long as you're doing it. When your intention is there and your interest is there, the correct pronunciation and everything else will follow. I've also put resources on my website where I chant the mantras myself so that people are able to hear what they sound like and can chant along with me.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully that will help with their pronunciation too. But as far as the mantras go, it's really fine to chant them silently to yourself in your mind. It's fine to chant them out loud. It's fine to chant them in a monotone voice. It's fine to chant them in a sing-song voice. It's fine to chant them as a kirtan practice, which would be a more musical method where you basically chant over and over and over with the musical instruments. And all of these things work, just whatever it is that makes people feel most comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever it is that makes them feel like they're most easily accessing the spirit of the chant. I say go for it.
And speaking of being more comfortable, it sounds like it would be a great de-stressor as well.
Absolutely. I mean, again, the whole point is that it's focusing the mind. And if you're focused on trying to pronounce the Gayatri mantra, for example, you're certainly not focused on whatever happened today with your boss. So anything to keep the mind focused on an elevated thought or something that's going to uplift your consciousness is really going to help you to alleviate any of the lower stresses that you might have.
Mm-hmm. In just about every kind of spirituality that's ever been, sound has been considered a direct link between humanity and the divine. Talk about how these sounds.
Absolutely.
Yeah, talk about how sound. It might be difficult for some to unpack that. How sound can connect us to divinity.
Well, I mean, this is a bit of a slippery slope because there's lots of ways to talk about this. And originally in college, my studies were in physics. And during the time that I was studying physics, I was really thrilled and heartened to learn that the most basic kind of common building block of the universe is vibration. I mean, and we all know this really well from Einstein's most famous equation that E equals mc squared. So energy and matter are the same. And of course, one of the ways in which we measure energy is through vibration. So it's like the great neutralizer, that all of us on some level have a vibration. We experience this and feel this when you meet someone new and, you say, oh, they have a good vibe or a bad vibe.
Mm-hmm.
You're feeling something about them. And so we're all able to connect through vibration. Throughout history, every single group of humanity has always had a musical tradition. And interestingly, there's absolutely no evolutionary purpose for this. Music doesn't save us. It doesn't cook our food. It doesn't put shelter over our heads. It doesn't, scare away the bears.
Mm-hmm.
But what music does is it brings us together. And I think that, more than anything, human beings are looking for a sense of connection. And music helps us to connect not only with each other on the level of vibration, but also with the more fundamental parts of the universe. And whether you call that, the particles, or whether you call that divinity, it's creating connection. And so music is powerful. And every human being understands that. They feel that.
Now, even though we're talking about divinity, the deities, tradition, and such, we're not really talking about religion as most people know it.
Mm-mm.
No,
Right.
no,
That's correct.
yeah.
There's a real distinction in the practice of yoga from the practice of a religion, and the essential difference is that yoga is pointing you to your own your own highest self. It's not pointing to anything outside of you.
Mhm.
No one else needs to get involved, So it's very much a mystical tradition. It's a way to take back your own power and discover for yourself what the most important and elevated parts of you are.
Mhm. Well, the world certainly is crying out for healing in so many ways. I'm wondering how does the ancient sacred sound, how can it be put into today's noisy and confusion-filled living? I want to see mantra as something practical.
Well, what's great about it, one of the great things is that you can do this silently, and I feel like you can, in that way, sneak it into whatever part of your day most needs it. You
Mm.
could chant mantra in the shower. You could sing it to yourself while you're driving. You can take a pause and say a quick om under your breath before you go into a challenging meeting. You can focus on the breath and the breathing before you have an argument with someone. You can say a little prayer based on a mantra for the highest good of all before you embark on anything. So, it can happen anywhere, anytime, and it's something that you can take with you. You don't need any expensive yoga pants to do mantra. You don't need a mat. You don't need a studio. All you need is your ability to focus.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're just clever about when you employ it and really pull it out of your toolkit in the times that you need it most, it's always going to be there for you.
Hmm. Yeah, I like the idea of a chant maybe at a traffic light or something like that. That's can be a very
Sure.
stressful. Yeah,
Yeah.
you'll
Yeah, I
be.
think a quick rom rom will make it go green for
There you
you,
go.
and you're on your way.
If you stay too long, you'll be alerted to that. So yeah.
Absolutely.
One last question. We'll let you go. Yoga is a popular and peaceful practice, and at the risk of sounding like a Miss America question, what can yoga do to help bring about a more peaceful world?
Well, I think, I remember when I was in choir as a kid, there was a song around Christmas time where one of the refrains was, "Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me." And yoga has that very same focus, that the most important thing you can do is to find peace within yourself, and that's going to translate into the way in which you interact within the world, in the way in which you behave within the world, and that is going to catalyze change. The only person we can really control, or the only thing that we can have control over, and even so, it's very difficult to have control, is over ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we start. We start by cleaning up our mind. We start by cleaning up our own side of the street. And as we do so, people will be inspired. They will respect our work. They will see the marked difference in the way we act, in the way we behave, in the way that we speak. And that's going to have major impact as we do whatever work we do in the world. And we might be inspired ourselves as we're going through our practice to do better work.
Mm-hmm.
To do more elevated work in some way and to contribute to society. But even if we don't, even if the only thing that we do is just become kinder, better people, that is going to have an effect. And so I always encourage people to start simply and to start with themselves and see where that leads them.
Well, as busy as you are.
That would be my advice.
Okay, that's good. That's very good. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, kind of, but it's
No,
one of
it's all right.
those world peace questions I know are kind of, it's a bit, it can be a bit much.
Sure, they're all the rage these days.
Yeah, they are. But we need it more than ever. Any more books in the offing? Any more projects that you can tell us about?
Well, the book before this one was called Myths of the Asanas, and it presents the mythology behind some of our favorite yoga poses. So for those who enjoy an asana practice, that's a great place to start. And I've got 31 of our favorite yoga asanas and their corresponding myths in that book. And I am working on my next book already, and it, of course, will be about mythology, but still getting some things hammered out. So I'll let you know as soon as I've got some details to share about that one.
Please do. Where can we find your website?
My website is alannak.com. That's ALANNAK.com. And you can find great information about the mantras. Again, I chant the mantras for them so they can pronounce them. I've got yoga classes and my music all on my website.
All right, great. And we will have a link to Alanna's website at achieve4yourself.com. The book is Sacred Sound, Discovering the Myth and Meaning of Mantra and Kirtan from Alanna Kaivalya. And I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us today. All the best with the book and future books, and continued success to you. Please come back and talk with us again, okay?
Will do. My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Alanna. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Alanna Kaivalya. And we'll be, as I said, linking to her website, and you'll be able to find out more about Alanna Kaivalya and also about Achieve for Yourself and what we're up to with the show and guests and things like that, because the best way to do it, as I like to mention from time to time, is for you to subscribe to the blog. The blog is Genuines. That's where we keep all of the information nice and neat and tidy as to who's going to be guesting with us and when, what the topics are going to be, show notes and things like that. So it's a good idea to get registered, and we'll take care of the rest. That's going to just about do it for today. Thank you so much for being with us. Be well, and I will talk to you soon.